My in-laws shamed me in front of everyone, then my son fought back. They laughed at me, that's the sound I'll remember long after the music fades and the expensive flowers wilt. It wasn't a gentle chuckle, it was a roar, a wave of ridicule that crashed over me, leaving me drenched in shame. The grand ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and tables draped in ivory silk, suddenly felt like a coliseum. And I was the spectacle. My sister-in-law, Clara, the radiant bride, wore a smirk that was more dazzling than the diamonds on her neck. Her mother, Margaret, my mother-in-law, stood beside her, her face a mask of triumphant disdain. They had orchestrated this moment perfectly, and as their laughter echoed, my 8-year-old son, Leo, squeezed my hand, his small fingers a lifeline in a sea of cruelty. Then he let go and did something that silenced them all. The humiliation had begun the moment we arrived. I had spent weeks saving for a new dress, a simple but elegant navy blue sheath that I hoped would allow me to blend in, but blending in was never an option in the Green family. Ever since my husband, their golden boy, passed away 3 years ago, I had been relegated to the role of a charity case, a constant, inconvenient reminder of their loss and my struggle. I was no longer family, I was a footnote. Finding our table was the first cut, while others were marked with elegant calligraphy, the bride's colleagues, university friends, the groom's family. Ours was a stark, jarring anomaly, a cheap, printed card, the kind you'd find in a dusty office supply closet, was propped against the centerpiece. It read, "Single mother waitress." For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, a bizarre prank by the venue staff. But then I saw Clara's eyes flicker towards me, a glint of malicious satisfaction in them. I saw the cluster of her friends snickering behind their champagne flutes. This was no mistake, it was a message, scrawled in the cheapest ink for the whole world to see. It was a joke at my expense, a reminder of my station. I worked 2 jobs, one of which was indeed waiting tables at night. To keep a roof over Leo's head, it was honest, grueling work that left my feet aching and my spirit weary, but I did it with my head held high. Until now, they had taken my struggle and twisted it into a punchline. My breath hitched, my face burned as if I'd been slapped. I wanted to grab Leo's hand and flee, to run from the suffocating scent of roses and ridicule. But Leo was already pulling out his chair, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Mom, why does our table have a funny name?" he asked, his voice a pure, innocent treble in the cacophony of malice. Before I could answer, to shield him with a lie, Margaret's voice sliced through the air. She had approached, a predator sensing weakness, her crimson dress a slash of color against the sea of pastels. "Oh, Rachel. Dear," she cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Don't look so shocked. We just wanted you to feel comfortable, acknowledging your situation." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy. Then she delivered the final, devastating blow. "After all," she declared, her voice rising to project across the room, "we can't have everyone thinking you're still prime material, a single mother, working for tips. You're a used product. My dear, it's best everyone knows the bargain they're getting." The room erupted, not just Clara's friends, but uncles, aunts, cousins, people who had once hugged me at family gatherings, who had praised my cooking, who had bounced Leo on their knees. They all laughed, a wave of harsh, metallic sound that struck me with physical force. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I felt small, insignificant, stripped bare under the weight of their judgment. My hard-working hands, my sleepless nights, my fierce love for my son, it all meant nothing. In their eyes, I was just a used product, a single mother waitress. That's when I felt Leo's hand slip from mine. I looked down, my heart seizing with panic, expecting to see him crying, but his face was set with a strange, unnerving calm. His jaw was tight, his blue eyes, his father's eyes, dark with a resolve that no 8-year-old should possess. He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping against the polished floor, a tiny note of defiance in the symphony of scorn. He started walking, not towards the exit as I prayed he would, but towards the stage, where the band was taking a break. A hush began to fall as people noticed the small boy marching with purpose towards the gleaming golden microphone. He was so small, the stage seemed to swallow him. He had to stand on his tiptoes to reach the mic. A low feedback squeal echoed through the hall, drawing every eye to him. Clara's smile faltered, replaced by a look of annoyance. Margaret's triumphant expression curdled into confusion. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. What was he doing? I wanted to scream for him to stop, to come back to the safety of our designated corner of shame. But I was frozen, rooted to the spot by a mixture of terror and a flicker of something else, a wild, desperate hope. Leo cleared his throat, his small voice suddenly booming through the powerful speakers. Clear and steady. Excuse me. Everyone, he said, his gaze sweeping across the silent, staring faces. My name is Leo Green. I'd like to give my Aunt Clara a special wedding gift. Time seemed to warp and stretch as I watched my son on that stage. 1,000 memories, 1,000 slights and paper cuts to the soul, coalesced into this single, terrifying moment. To understand the venom in Margaret's voice, the triumphant cruelty on Clara's face, you have to understand the Greens. You have to understand what I represented to them, a disruption to their perfect. Porcelain world. I met Michael in college beside. He was everything the Green family valued: handsome, charismatic, and destined for a lucrative career in finance. He was their prince, and they were the queen mother and princess who guarded his kingdom. When he brought me home, a quiet art history major from a modest, middle-class family. Their appraisal was swift and silent. I could feel them cataloging my non-designer clothes, my lack of a trust fund, my pedigree that didn't trace back to any notable name. But Michael loved me, fiercely and unequivocally, and for a long time. His love was a shield. Margaret's disapproval was cloaked in suffocating concern. Are you sure that dress is appropriate for the club? Dear, you don't want people to talk, she'd say, her eyes scanning my simple dress with thinly veiled pity. Her help was always a form of control. Her advice a thinly veiled critique. She'd rearrange my furniture when I wasn't home, just to improve the flow, and buy Leo toys far too expensive and ostentatious, a silent statement that my own provisions were inadequate. Clara's animosity was different. It was the sharp, jealous sting of a sister who had to share her brother's affection for the first time. My presence was an intrusion on her territory. She specialized in backhanded compliments. It's so brave of you to wear your hair like that, Rachel. I could never pull it off, she'd say with a saccharine smile. At family dinners, she'd regale the table with stories of their idyllic childhood, peppering the tales with inside jokes I couldn't understand. Expertly weaving a tapestry of belonging that had no thread for me, I was the perpetual outsider, a guest with a temporary pass. Then, the unthinkable happened. A drunk driver, a head-on collision, and my Michael was gone. The shield shattered. My world imploded, but in their eyes, the family's tragedy was theirs alone. My grief was secondary, an inconvenient echo of their own profound loss. They became the sole proprietors of his memory. Michael would have wanted us to sell the house. Rachel, it's too much for you to handle. Margaret insisted just weeks after the funeral. Michael always said this neighborhood was going downhill, Clara would add, her words painting me as incompetent, incapable of honoring my husband's legacy. Their offers of financial support came with strings thicker than anchor chains. They wanted control over my life, over Leo's upbringing, turning their help into a leash. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that if I accepted, I would become their permanent project, their living embodiment of charity. I would be forever indebted, forever reminded of my fall from grace as the wife of the Golden Y. So, I refused. I thanked them politely and told them I could manage. The jobs came next. First, a part-time position at an art gallery, which was respectable enough for them. But it wasn't enough. Leo needed braces, the car needed repairs, and the cost of living in a city like Boston was a relentless tide. So, I took the second job, waitressing at a fine dining restaurant downtown. The hours were long, the work was physically demanding, but the pay was good, and it allowed me to stand on my own 2 feet. It was my declaration of independence. To the Greens, it was a declaration of war. It was a disgrace, a green. Even by marriage, serving food to strangers, it was a stain on their pristine family name. "What will people think?" Margaret had wailed over the phone. "My son did not die for his wife to lower herself to the level of a common servant." Clara was more direct. "You're embarrassing us. Rachel, you're embarrassing Leo." They couldn't see the dignity in my work. They only saw the perceived shame it brought upon them. The fact that my hard work meant I didn't need their money was the ultimate insult. I had taken away their power, their leverage. And that's what led to this. The single mother waitress sign wasn't just a joke. It was a punishment. It was their way of putting me back in my place, of broadcasting my shameful independence to the world. Margaret's used product comment was the final nail, intended to strip me of any remaining dignity. They wanted to break me, to make me regret ever defying them. Back in the ballroom, the silence stretched thin, vibrating with anticipation. Every eye was on my small, determined son. My fear for him was a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now tangled with something else, a fierce, defiant pride. He wasn't just my son, he was Michael's son. He had his father's courage, his father's unshakable sense of right and wrong. He was the one piece of Michael they could never control or diminish. Clara's smile was long gone, her perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin, anxious line. She shifted on her feet, exchanging a nervous glance with her mother, for the first time all night. They looked uncertain. They had no idea what was coming, and honestly, neither did I. Leo's small, clear voice, announcing his gift, hung in the air like a held breath. The room was a tableau of suspended animation. The clinking of glasses had stopped. The murmurs had died. For a moment. Clara seemed to lose her bridal composure. Her face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, flickered with genuine alarm. She had orchestrated the public shaming of me, her sister-in-law, with meticulous cruelty. But a child on a stage with a microphone. This was an unscripted deviation from her perfect day. She recovered quickly, forcing a syrupy sweet smile. She glided a few steps toward the stage, her expensive gown rustling like a sigh. "Oh, Leo, sweetie," she called out, her voice a strained, high-pitched melody. "That is so sweet of you. But the band is about to start again. Why don't you come down and give your Auntie Clara a big hug instead? We can talk about your gift later." It was a dismissal disguised as affection, a public attempt to regain control. She was treating him like any other child who had wandered off, hoping to coax him back into invisibility. But Leo didn't move. He stood his ground, his small shoulders squared, a tiny sentinel guarding a profound purpose. His gaze remained fixed on her. "It's okay, Aunt Clara," he said, his voice ringing out with unnerving certainty. "This won't take long. It's a very special gift. It's from my dad." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. My dad? 2 simple words that changed everything. He hadn't just invoked his father, he had invoked their son, their brother, the ghost at their feast. Michael. The name hung unspoken in the air, a sacred, untouchable memory that they had weaponized against me but never expected to be used against them. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a child's impulse anymore. This was calculated. What had he overheard? What had he pieced together in his young, observant mind? The mention of Michael completely disarmed Clara. To silence Leo now would be to silence a message from her beloved, deceased brother. It would be an act of sacrilege in front of everyone who had known and loved him. Her smile vanished, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed panic. She looked helplessly towards her mother. Margaret, however, was made of sterner stuff. She was not one to be deterred by sentiment, even if it involved her own son. Her face hardened into a mask of pure fury. Decorum be damned. Her expression said, "This rebellion would be crushed." She started purposefully towards the stage, her crimson dress a warning signal. "That is quite enough. Leo," she commanded, her voice low and menacing. "You are making a scene, Atoam. Get down from there this instant." She was about to mount the steps, to physically remove my son from the stage, when a new player entered the drama. Robert, Clara's new husband, a man I barely knew, stepped forward. He had been standing by the head table, looking increasingly uncomfortable. He was a kind-looking man, if a little overwhelmed by the Green family dynamics. He placed a gentle but firm hand on his new mother-in-law's arm. "Margaret." "Wait," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "Let the boy speak. He said it's from Michael. Let's just hear what he has to say. It's okay." Margaret shot him a look of venomous disbelief, clearly appalled that her new son-in-law would dare to countermand her. But she was trapped. To cause a scene with him, to argue in front of all their guests, would be the ultimate breach of wedding etiquette. Robert wasn't a blood relation she could bully into submission. He was the groom. With a look of thunderous rage, she froze, her hand hovering uselessly in the air. She took a single. Stiff step back. Defeated. Clara stood beside her, looking as if she might faint. All this time, I was a statue at my table of shame. My earlier humiliation had evaporated, replaced by a much more potent and complex cocktail of emotions. I was terrified. My son was on a collision course with his formidable grandmother and aunt. He was using the memory of his father as a shield, a memory so precious and painful to me. A part of me screamed internally for him to stop, to come back to me, to not invite the wrath of these women upon his small head. Yet, beneath the terror, a fierce subterranean pride was pushing its way to the surface. He was not cowering, he was not crying, and he was fighting back in a way I never could. He was defending my honor. The room was now so quiet I could hear the frantic thumping of my own heart. The mockery was gone, the laughter a distant, sour memory. Now. There was only a tense, breathless anticipation. The guests were no longer looking at a joke. They were witnessing a confrontation. They were staring at me, their expressions a mixture of pity, confusion, and raw curiosity. They had laughed when I was the target. But now, a child was at the center, and the mood had shifted from cruel amusement to high-stakes drama. Leo, having secured his platform, seemed to draw strength from the silence. He adjusted the microphone slightly. His eyes scanned the crowd, the sea of upturned, waiting faces, until they found mine. For a split second, our gazes locked across the vast room. He gave me the smallest, most imperceptible nod, a gesture of reassurance that shattered and rebuilt my heart all at once. It said, "I've got this, Mom." Then he turned his attention back to his aunt, his voice clear and steady as it once again filled the silent, cavernous hall. The smile was wiped clean from Clara's face. The battle of wills was over. My son had won. Now, he was ready to deliver his gift. My gift for you. "Aunt Clara," Leo began, his voice impossibly steady, "is a story. It's about my mom." A collective intake of breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, wild thing? He looked directly at Clara, whose face was a carefully constructed mask of neutrality, though her eyes were wide with a trapped animal's panic. "My mom works really, really hard," Leo continued, speaking with the simple, earnest sincerity that only a child possesses. "She comes home late and her feet are sore. Sometimes I pretend to be asleep when she checks on me, and I hear her sit down and count her tips. She puts them in a big glass jar in her closet. It's almost full now." He paused, and in that silence, I could picture the jar perfectly. It was an old pickle jar, and it held my dreams small, crumpled bills and heavy coins that represented sleepless nights and sore muscles. It was my emergency fund, my FU fund, my Leo's future fund. It was the most private, sacred symbol of my independence. And my son was now describing it to a room full of people who despised that very independence. I felt a fresh wave of heat rise to my cheeks, a feeling of being exposed in a new and intimate way. "One time," Leo said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more confessional, "I asked her why she worked so hard when Grandma Margaret offered her money. I heard them on the phone, but Grandma Nana said Mom was making a mistake." My blood turned to ice. Margaret's face, across the room, was a thundercloud of fury. She looked like she might actually lunge for the stage. "My mom told me that some things are more important than easy money," Leo explained. His brow furrowed as he recalled the memory. "She said that dignity is what you build for yourself, not what someone gives you. And she said that Dad would be proud of her for standing on her own feet." He was paraphrasing a conversation I barely remembered, a late-night talk we'd had when he was supposed to be asleep. I had thought he hadn't understood, but he had understood everything. He had listened and stored it all away in his young, fiercely loyal heart. Then, he turned his gaze from Clara and let it sweep across the room until it landed squarely on Margaret. The shift was deliberate, chilling. "My mom doesn't think she's a used product." "Grandma," he said, his voice clear as a bell. The exact words, Margaret's words, shot across the room like a poisoned dart, finding their target with deadly accuracy. A wave of audible gasps rippled through the guests. People turned to stare openly at Margaret, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock and dawning disgust. The public mockery had just been made public knowledge. Margaret recoiled as if struck. The color drained from her face, leaving her crimson dress to clash violently with her pallid skin. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. She had been exposed, her cruelty laid bare by the one person she could not attack her own grandson. Leo wasn't finished. He turned back to Clara, who looked as if the floor had dissolved beneath her feet. "And she's not a waitress. Aunt Clara. She is, but that's not who she is. She's my mom, and my dad told me before he went to heaven that it was my job to protect her because she was the best person in the world. He said she was a queen who built her own castle, even if it was small." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and unstoppable, but they weren't tears of humiliation anymore. They were tears of overwhelming love, of heart-wrenching pride. My shame, which had felt like a suffocating shroud just moments before, was burning away in the fierce heat of my son's love. It was a baptism by fire, Tan, the old Rachel, the one who absorbed the Green's insults, who tried to make herself smaller to fit into their world, was dying right there at that table. The little boy on the stage was my son, my blood, my heart walking outside my body, and he was fighting for me. He was showing more courage than I had ever shown for myself. In that moment, something inside me shifted, a tectonic plate of my soul grinding into a new position. The fear that had paralyzed me for 3 years, fear of their judgment, their power, their influence over Leo, it vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I had been so focused on shielding my son from hardship that I failed to see I was also shielding his enemies from the consequences of their actions. I was the one teaching him to endure cruelty by enduring it myself. No more. My emotional collapse was over. My period of quiet mourning and endurance was done. My son had taken the microphone and silenced a room, but he had also shouted me awake. Slowly. Deliberately. I pushed back my chair. The scrape of it against the floor sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. Every head turned towards me. I stood up. My back straight, my chin high. The tears were still wet on my cheeks. But my eyes were clear. I looked at my son, my brave, beautiful boy, standing alone on that stage. I started walking towards him. Not to pull him off, not to hide him, but to join him. My steps were steady, my gaze locked on him. I was no longer the single mother waitress cowering at her table. I was Leo's mother, and I was walking through the ashes of my humiliation to stand beside my champion. My walk to the stage felt like crossing a continent. Every eye in the room was a physical weight, but for the first time it didn't press me down. It held me up. The whispers that followed me were not of ridicule, but of awe and disbelief. I passed the head table, my gaze briefly meeting Robert's. He gave me a short, sharp nod, a look of profound respect in his eyes. He had tried to be a peacemaker, and now he was a witness. I reached the steps, and my son, my little lion, turned and held out his hand for me. I took it, and the circuit of our strength was complete. I stood beside him, a united front, and gently took the microphone from the stand. The weight of it in my hand was solid, real. It was a conduit for the voice I had swallowed for 3 years. I looked out at the sea of faces, no longer a blur of judgment, but a collection of individuals who had been made complicit in an act of cruelty. "Thank you, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent hall. That was the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. I squeezed his hand. "Your father would be so proud of you." Then, I turned my attention to the bride. Clara stood frozen, her face a mess of panic and shattered pride. The perfect makeup couldn't hide the blotchy redness creeping up her neck. "Clara," I said, and my voice was devoid of malice. It was something far more damning. It was filled with pity. A wedding is supposed to be about love, about two families joining together. It's about building something new. You had a choice today. You could have chosen to build a bridge, to welcome my son, your nephew, Michael's son, and me as family, but you chose to burn the bridge instead. You chose cruelty. I paused, letting the words sink in. "This nameplate," I said, gesturing towards the table of shame. "Single mother waitress? You thought it was a weapon to humiliate me. You thought you were defining me by my struggle, but you were wrong. You were defining yourself." It shows a smallness of spirit that my husband, your brother, would have never recognized. Clara flinched as if I had slapped her. A low murmur went through the crowd. I then shifted my gaze to the matriarch of this ruined affair. Margaret stood rigid, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her face was no longer pale. It was flushed with a dark, apoplectic rage. "And you, Margaret," I said, my voice hardening. "For 3 years, you have tried to control me with your money and your judgment. You have tried to make me feel small, inadequate, and ashamed. You called me a used product." I let her own words hang in the air, ugly and obscene. I saw people who had laughed earlier now looking at their plates. Shamefaced. "Let me be very clear," I continued, my voice rising with a power that came from the deepest part of my soul. "I am not a product. I am not used. I am a woman who loved your son with everything I had. I am a mother who works 2 jobs, not because I am a victim, but because I am a survivor." "This uniform," I said, thinking of my waitress apron at home, "and these tired feet that my son spoke of, are not symbols of my shame. They are my armor. They are the symbols of my independence from you. They are the proof that I don't need your money or your approval to raise Michael's son into a man he would be proud of." the only thing used in this room. I finished, my voice ringing with absolute finality. Is the excuse of family to justify your cruelty? The only thing bargain bin is a character that has to punch down at a grieving widow to feel powerful. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of a truth that could not be denied. Then, the spell was broken. Robert, the groom, pushed his chair back and stood up. He looked at Clara, his face a mixture of disappointment and daze. "I need some air," he said, his voice tight. And he turned his back on his bride, on his mother-in-law, and walked out of the ballroom. The doors swung shut behind him, sealing Clara's humiliation. Her face crumpled. Her perfect day, her grand performance, was utterly destroyed. She looked at her mother, not for support, but with a dawning look of horror, as if seeing for the first time the monster she had allied herself with. Margaret, however, finally found her voice. "How dare you," she hissed, taking a step forward. "How dare you ruin my daughter's wedding?" But before I could even respond, an elderly man from a nearby table, one of Michael's uncles, stood up. "Sit down." "Margaret," he said, his voice thick with authority. "You've done enough. The girl is right. You should be ashamed of yourself." That was the final blow. Margaret froze, her mouth agape, publicly rebuked by her own family. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. The room was no longer theirs. The narrative was no longer theirs. It was mine. I placed the microphone back in its stand. I looked at my son, and he looked at me, his eyes shining with love. I took his hand. "We were done here. Let's go home." "Mom," he whispered. "Yes, baby," I whispered back. "Let's go home." Hand in hand. We walked off the stage. We didn't rush. We walked with the calm, steady pace of people who were free. We walked past the gawking guests, past the table with its hateful sign, past a weeping bride and a defeated, disgraced matriarch. We walked towards the exit, our heads held high, leaving behind the wreckage of their perfect, porcelain world, which we had just shattered with the simple, unbreakable truth. The heavy ballroom doors swung shut behind us, muffling the chaotic symphony of shock and recrimination we left in our wake. The air in the Grand Hotel corridor felt different, cool, clean, and blessedly quiet. It tasted of freedom. For a moment, we just stood there, my hand resting on Leo's small shoulder. The silence a balm on our raw nerves. The adrenaline that had surged through me on stage began to recede, leaving not emptiness, but a profound and settled calm. "Mom, are you okay?" Leo asked, his voice small again, the weight of his brave performance seemingly settling upon him. I knelt down so I was level with him, my hands on his arms. I looked into his eyes, his father's eyes, so full of courage and concern for me. The tears I had shed on stage were gone, replaced by a love so fierce it felt like it could power a city. "Okay, Leo. I'm better than okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "What you did in there, you were a lion, you were a king. You stood up for me, you stood up for the truth." A small, proud smile finally bloomed on his face. "They were being mean," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're not what they said." "No, I'm not," I affirmed, pulling him into a hug that felt like it held 3 years of unspoken gratitude. "And I'm so sorry I ever let you see me let them be mean to me. That's going to stop. For good." It was a promise to him, and to myself. I had been so busy protecting him from the world, I hadn't realized I needed to protect him from my own passivity. We didn't linger. We collected our coats and walked out of the opulent hotel, leaving the world of the Greens behind us. The night air of Boston was crisp and invigorating. As we waited for a taxi, my phone buzzed incessantly in my purse. I ignored it. I knew who it would be: furious texts from Clara, venomous voicemails from Margaret, perhaps even confused messages from distant relatives. It didn't matter. Their words had no more power over me. They were firing arrows at a woman who was no longer there, in the taxi on the way home. Leo fell asleep, his head resting in my lap. I stroked his hair, my heart overflowing. He had given me back my own strength. He had reminded me who I was, not in relation to the Greens or even to Michael, but as myself, Rachel Green, a woman who was more than a widow, more than a waitress, a queen who built her own castle, even if it was small. The days that followed were quiet. The storm had passed, leaving a strange and peaceful silence. I blocked Margaret's and Clara's numbers. I received a short, formal email from a lawyer informing me that Robert had initiated annulment proceedings. There was a brief, handwritten note from Robert himself that arrived a week later. It was an apology, not for Clara's actions, but for his own silence. He wrote that he had witnessed something inexcusable and that he wished me and my son all the best. I appreciated it, but it was a postscript to a story that was already over for me. The biggest change was not external, but internal. I walked differently. I held my head higher. At work, I felt a new sense of pride in the crispness of my apron, in the satisfaction of a job well done. It was, as I had told Margaret, my armor, and I wore it with honor. The pickle jar on my closet shelf no longer looked like a symbol of struggle. It looked like a trophy. The true resolution came a month later. I received a letter from Michael's uncle, the one who had stood up and silenced Margaret. It was a kind letter, expressing his profound shame over what had happened. He wrote that Michael had always adored me and had been so proud of the life we were building. Tucked inside the letter was a check for a significant amount of money. The note attached read, "This is not from Margaret. This is not charity. This is from your family. It is Leo's inheritance from his father, which should have been managed with respect, not used as a weapon. Use it to make your castle a little bigger. Michael would have wanted that." I cried when I read it, but for the first time, they were tears of pure joy and relief. It wasn't about the money itself. It was the recognition. It was the final, validating truth that the Green family was not a monolith of cruelty. There was decency there, overshadowed but not extinguished. It was justice, delivered not with anger but with kindness. We didn't move to a bigger castle, not right away. But I took the money and invested it wisely for Leo's future. I quit my second job, the waitressing position, not out of shame, but because I no longer had to. I found a full-time curatorial position at a small but respected gallery. Returning to the art world I loved, I had evenings and weekends free for my son. Our small apartment became less of a frantic way station and more of a peaceful home. The laughter that once echoed in my nightmares faded, replaced by the sound of Leo's laughter in our sunlit living room. They had tried to silence me, to bury me under labels and insults. But from that suffocating earth, something new had grown, watered by a mother's love and brought into the light by the fierce courage of her son. We had faced the fire, and we had walked out not just unscathed, but forged anew.